All right, good morning, everybody. Anybody have any news? Nothing to share? Nothing? Doesn't have to be business or related. All right. Anybody have questions? No questions. All right, so yes, sir.
I did. There was one question on the quiz about, and I think I kind of answered it myself, but it was saying that no states can make a law again that goes against what the Constitution says.
Right.
Would that still apply? Being, I think it was the federal supremacy clause. Does that still apply as being constitutional?
Yes.
So, but it would be up to the federal government to actually pursue those.
Somebody would have to challenge it. That's right. Yeah, I mean, a state could pass a law and that is not within their authority under the Constitution. And if the federal government didn't challenge it, we'd be okay. Or not, you'd be okay, but that law would stand. So it'd stand until it was challenged. Good morning. All right, so good question. Any other questions? So I had a couple of questions from around my students that I wanted to talk about to kind of clarify things. The little Easter eggs that I said I was going to hide about colors and stuff. I might put one in everything, a different one in every one you're supposed to read, but I might not. It just depends. So I think the question I had from a student in the online class, or no, maybe it was in here, but it was why I thought there was just going to be one. I didn't know there'd be more than one. So I'm experimenting with that. I've never done that before. So y'all feel free to tell me privately or in class if you think it's dumb or anything. I'm just trying to make sure that everybody reads the little bit of reading I give them.
I was about to say, I think it was good because it's 3 free questions if you actually read.
There you go. 3 free questions if you actually read. And if you notice, there were extra points on this quiz too. So I hope that what you saw from this first quiz was that I'm really just trying to make sure that you read and you're paying attention. All right, so today we're going to tackle a new unit on the court system. And we're going to, again, following our pattern of every week, we'll do a new topic and then I'll quiz you on it the next Monday night. So your quiz for this unit we do Monday night at midnight. It'll go live on Thursday, so you can do it anytime you want between Thursday afternoon and Monday night. Take home, open note, same as the one before. My laptop at home does not allow me to access the lockdown browser because it's outdated or I don't know, but I can do it from my work computer. So it just so happened when I was posting your quiz for last week, I was at home. So no browser required last week, but I'm going to try to do that going forward. All right, if nobody has any questions, then let's jump on in. Yes, sir.
For the discussion for this week?
Yep.
Is it still due by Thursday?
So, that's a great question. The way I don't think I mentioned this last week. The way I'm going to grade your discussion is that I'm going to give you 1 grade for the whole semester. If you answer every question, you get 100 on discussion grades. If you answer 9 out of 10, you get 90, 8 out of 10, so on and so forth. I really don't grade those until the end of the semester, or I don't look to see that you did them. So there's usually never a deadline on discussion. I just did last week because I wanted everybody to answer my first question. But usually that's something, obviously I recommend that you do it as we go, but there is no hard deadline for the discussion questions. I'm glad you brought that up, Levi. That's a great point. If anybody has any questions about that, let me know. So we get to the end of the semester and you look back and they're like, oh, I forgot to do 2 discussion questions, and you're free to do them then. Not a problem. And I'll remind you as we go. So that discussion will count the same as a quiz. They don't count individually, they count collectively as 1 grade. Do the same as a quiz or an assignment. Make sense? All right, so today we're going to talk about the court systems. Last week we talked about sources of law, and I wanted you to sort of be familiar with the different areas that law comes from, the different areas where we may be bound to follow the law, all the different places that we as business people would expect to look to see where law would affect how we act and how we behave and how we do business. This week, I sort of want to give you an overview of our court system, both on a state level and at the federal level. And I want you to be just basically fluent in sort of how those two systems work, the names that we call the parties, the names that we call different sort of courts, and be able to sort of understand how a party ends up in the court system. And once they end up in the court system, how they navigate their way through it. Next week, we're going to talk about litigation, which is people suing each other. And I want you to, we'll get into a little bit more about the steps in litigation and what happens when you get sued. This week is just about an overview of the court system itself. I think what would be probably helpful as a place for me to start is by saying that each state has their own court system. So each of the 50 states has their own court system. The federal government has their separate court system as well. And as you would expect from the federal government, the federal court system encompasses the whole country. The state of Georgia's court system encompasses just the state of Georgia. There is overlap between the federal court system and the state court system. So some cases, and I'm not testing you on this, but some cases could start in the federal court system or the state court system. Sometimes they're exclusive depending on the subject matter of the case, and sometimes the parties have a choice of which court system they want to go in. Sometimes a case will start out in a state court system and it will get moved to the federal court system. That is a right that parties have to request, and that's beyond the scope of what we're getting into. But I just want you to know that there is some overlap. The entry-level court in both systems, both federal and state, is called the trial court. That's where we begin. That's your entry level into the court system. If I sue Mr. Stolyar for defamation because of some trash talk that he said about me, I'm going to do it probably in a state court for the state of Georgia, and we're going to start out in Superior Court, which I'm just using that as an example. It's where we're going to start. The trial court is the one you're most familiar with. The trial court is the one where you have the one judge in the robe, you've got the jury, you have a witness stand with witnesses coming up and testifying on the witness stand, you have lawyers giving opening arguments, closing arguments, you have lawyers questioning witnesses, you have lawyers making objections, you have judges making rulings, you have juries giving verdicts. Trial courts are where the evidence is gathered. That's where both parties put before the court their version of what they think happened. All the facts that they can get into evidence, that's where that happens. All right, once a decision is made at the trial court level, in a criminal case, the decision at the trial court level would be guilty or not guilty. In a civil case, the decision of the court would be that the defendant is liable, responsible for the damages they caused, or not. The loser at the trial court level has the right to appeal. Okay? Once we get above a trial court, we get into appellate courts, courts of appeal. There is a difference that I want you to appreciate and understand about a trial court and an appellate court. The trial courts are concerned with deciding what the facts of the case are. All right? If I rear end Mr. Gaduru's car on University Avenue on the way to class this morning, and he sues me for the damages that he's incurred to repair his car, for maybe some physical injuries that he sustained, for lost wages, at the trial court, he's going to bring all his evidence in. He's going to bring his pay stubs to show what he makes. He might bring his employer in to testify. Mr. Gaduru is an hourly employee. He makes $30 an hour. He works an average of 30 hours a week. He was out of work for 2 weeks. We calculate that as this much lost wages. If he sustained injuries, he is going to present evidence to the court, his medical records, testimony from his doctor. This is what I examined him for, and this is what I found. I did x-rays. He had a broken tibia. We did a MRI. He had some soft tissue injury in his neck. Figuring out what happened. For my part, my defense might be that it was his fault. He stopped short. He slammed on brakes. I was doing the speed limit and following behind him. So part of the trial court's fact finding is deciding how fast was I going, how fast was he going, are there any witnesses that saw that can say what happened? If we disagree and his lawyer and he says it was my fault and I say it was his fault, the judge and the jury are going to decide what happened and whose fault it was. Tebow was speeding. There were eyewitnesses that said he was driving with his eyes closed. He never hit the brakes. Those are all things that the trial court would decide what happened. Issues of fact. So trial courts decide issues of fact. And then they make a ruling in a criminal sense, whether or not somebody's guilty or not. In the civil sense, whether or not somebody's liable or not. If I don't like what happened, let's say that I lost my case against Mr. Gaduru. I want to appeal. The only thing I can appeal is whether or not the judge made a mistake in applying the law to the case. All right, I don't get to argue the facts again. The trial court is the only one who gets to decide what the facts of the case were. Once we get on appeal and we go to higher courts, the facts of the case are set as they were found by the trial court. So let's say that I appeal. I can't appeal and say my appeal is based on the fact that it was not my fault. They said it was my fault, but it's not. I've got to find mistakes in the application of the law. Let's say that Mr. Gaduru had some witnesses who testified and they said that they heard somebody else say that it was my fault, or that they heard somebody else say that I never put on the brakes. That's hearsay. I might make an objection and say, Judge, that witness can't testify to that. They have to have personal knowledge. They have to have seen what happened. The judge might say, overruled. I'm going to allow that testimony in. The judge allows that in, and that's part of the reason that I got found to be liable. Then on appeal, my argument might be not that I didn't do it, but that the judge was wrong to allow hearsay testimony. Okay? We're not having witnesses testify again. We're not talking about who saw me with my eyes closed. We're not talking about length of skid marks and what speed that correlates to. We're not talking about medical records and injuries. We're not talking about the facts. The facts, we take them as they were found. Question on appeal is whether or not there was a mistake of law. In the Brown case from last week, right, there was really no argument as to the facts of the case. The minority parents tried to enroll their children in the white schools. No one disputed that. On appeal, the issue was it constitutional or not? That's a question of law. So trial courts decide issues of fact. They make a decision based on the facts as they find them. And then appellate courts decide questions of law. This is a good spot for me to pause and ask you to pull up, if you have in front of you, the Georgia court system chart that I have posted to the content module. You're not being tested on this. Damien.
Isn't it true that you can only appeal if it was something that you objected to during the course of it,
The question is, can you only appeal if it was something you objected to? Not always. Yes and no. So like if the judge allowed hearsay testimony and I didn't object to it, then I might be prohibited from appealing on that ground. But I can always appeal that the law that I was found to have violated was unconstitutional, like in the Brown case. But yes, that's a good point. Sometimes in order to preserve your right to appeal, you've got to put it on the record that I do make that objection. Not testing you on that. Not testing you on anything on this chart. This is purely for me to sort of explain to you so you can see visually how Georgia's court system is set up. I can't get this to work. If anybody knows how to work these audio visuals, come on up. Otherwise, I'm just going to ask you to look at your computer. But I think everyone here has a computer, so never mind. All right, so in the Georgia court system, those two bottom rows start with Superior Court on the third row, Probate Court, State Court, Juvenile Court, and then the bottom row, Recorder's Court, Municipal Court, Magistrate Court. Those are trial courts. Those are where you would start if you had to bring a case in the state court system. Most state court systems are set up in this, have this structure, but they all have different names. So like when you watch Law and Order, and they go cha-ching, and it says like Supreme Court Trial Part 89, they called one of their trial courts, lower courts, a Supreme Court. It doesn't match up with what we do. So that's another reason I'm not testing you on this. I don't want you to get caught up in the names of the courts. I just want you to appreciate the general idea that there are different courts and you go to different ones depending on what your subject matter is. So for example, let me segue in for a second into the idea of jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is the power of a court to hear a case. A court cannot issue a binding decision if they didn't have the authority to hear that type of case. It's null and void. Like a kid saying, you're not the boss of me. All right? The court has to be the right boss of the parties in front of it. Probate court, on your third row, that's the place where you go in Georgia for wills and estates. When someone dies, you go to probate court to take care of their assets and handle their estate.
Just like divorces too.
Divorces is not probate court. I'm gonna get to that, but you're getting the point. It's different subject matters go to different courts. Probate court is guardianships in Georgia, conservatorships. That's when someone doesn't have the capacity to manage their own money and they need a neutral party to do it for them. Probate court in Georgia issues marriage licenses. They issue gun licenses, which I've always thought was an interesting combination, that you could get married and get a gun at the same time, or get your license at the same time. Probate court handles like parade permits, fireworks permits. You don't need to know all this. Just know that in every state, they're going to have different courts to handle different subject matter. That's probate court. I'm skipping superior and state for a second. Juvenile court, hopefully you're not familiar personally with juvenile court, but that is for cases where a person under the age of 18 has been charged with a crime. If children under the age of 18 have to be taken away from their parents because of neglect or abuse. And then there's some other minor things here and there. Actually, interesting in Georgia, if you're under 18 and you want to have an abortion, I don't know if this new law still applies, if that law still applies now that all this abortion stuff has come about, but you used to you could go to juvenile court. I'm sorry, I'm confusing y'all. The law was if you're under 18 and you want to have an abortion, you had to have your parents' permission. But you could get around that by going to juvenile court and asking the judge for an exception to that, to let you not have to tell your parents. And it had certain reasons why you could do that. I've only seen that happen. I've seen it happen a couple times. So that's juvenile court. Going down to the bottom row, recorder's court. That's like where folks go for their first court appearance after they've been arrested. Like you get DUI and you get locked up overnight. The next morning you got to go to court. That's recorder's court. You go ahead and they'll issue you a bond or deny you bond, say basically how much you have to pay to get out, that sort of thing. It's not they're not finding you guilty. They're not having testimony about all that. They're just deciding if there's probable cause. Municipal court and magistrate court have some overlap. This is municipal court is where you go for violations of like city laws. Like if I'm only supposed to have 10 chickens and I have 12 chickens and the city comes and writes me a violation for violating the ordinance, they would do that to me in municipal court. Evictions are municipal court. Magistrate court is small claims court. You can bring pretty much any case in magistrate court as long as the amount in controversy is less than $15,000. So that's more small claims court, kind of like some of the stuff you see on TV, although TV court is not real court, but those type of disputes. You know, we were dating and I kicked her out of my apartment and she owed me 1 month's rent, or when she left, she took the keys to my motorcycle, something like that. That's just kind of petty stuff you see on TV. That would be magistrate court. Superior court and state court are trial courts in Georgia that have general jurisdiction. So you can bring pretty much any case in superior or state court, except for cases that have to go to another court, like wills or guardianships or something. Again, not important that you know the nuances of this, just important that you get the idea that there are all these different courts that are entry-level trial courts, and you sometimes you have your choice. Sometimes you don't, but sometimes you do. Levi asked about like divorces and adoptions and family law. That all has to go to superior court. So that's where we would start. If I don't like what happened to me in this trial court, any on these two bottom rows, then I can appeal the way the arrow goes. So in Georgia, if I'm on that bottom row and I didn't like what happened in recorder's court, municipal court, or magistrate court, I could appeal to superior court first. So superior court is actually a trial court and an appellate court, just depending on where the case comes from. Once I get up to that second level, to superior court, state court, and juvenile court, my next stop is only to the Georgia Court of Appeals. And then if I don't like what happens at the Georgia Court of Appeals level, then I can appeal to the Georgia Supreme Court. If I don't like what happens at the Georgia Supreme Court, am I out of luck, or do I get to keep going? I can keep going in some cases. I can jump over to the federal court system and try to make my way up to the United States Supreme Court. So let's look for a second at, well, one more point before we close this out. You don't start a case at the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court. You'd have to go to a trial court, get a decision, have evidence taken, have a record created before you could move up to an appellate court. So the top two rows are appellate courts, the bottom two rows are trial courts, but you can see that superior court is sometimes also an appellate court. All right, click out of that and click on the federal court system. Yes, sir.
Real quick, if I got like a speeding ticket for like the government building downtown, like what type of court is that?
You're going to go to recorder's court for a traffic ticket.
Okay.
Yeah. Anybody been to recorder's court? Anybody been to court for a school district that's the camera? That's you know what I'm talking about? Tim has? Well, those two, but the speed cameras. Y'all been on, James, you got one of those? Maybe. Yeah, I get them in the mail all the time, and then I bring them home, and I'm like, all right, we're going to see who it is. I have 4 children. I'm like, who y'all want to take bets on who this one is? It's almost always mom. And it has been me before. So if you've gone in Muskogee County, if you've gotten a school district camera ticket, you go to magistrate court is where you've gone for those. Evictions, you could go there as well. So I'm not going to ask everybody their experience in court. But at some point in all our lives, you'll have contact at some point with some court. it's not always because you've done something wrong. Like if you die and you leave a will, then your heirs are going to have to go to probate court to take care of that. Did you have a question? Or you just stretching?
Yeah, I had a question.
All right.
So recorder's court, like I know most places have municipal and magistrate, but does every jurisdiction have a recorder's court?
No. Great question. So the model that you're looking at on the Georgia State Court system, that's for Muskogee County. Some smaller counties don't have all these courts. Every county, there's 159, I think, counties in Georgia, and they all have a superior court, they all have a juvenile court, they all have a probate court, and they all have a magistrate court. If they're bigger in population, then they might have some of these other courts. There is no county in Georgia that has more courts than what you're looking at right now. So Atlanta would have the exact same breakdown of courts. Fulton County would as Muskogee County does. Mr. Goodugru.
Is there like a certain minimum amount of people you need to have a recorded court?
There is, and I don't know what it is, but would be a Georgia state statute passed by the legislature that says counties with populations over X amount are going to have recorders courts. So like if you get arrested in Stewart County, which is south of here and very small and very rural, you got picked up for DUI, you needed a court appearance the next morning, you'd probably do that in Superior Court. Sometimes, like in Harris County, Georgia, probate court will handle traffic stuff. It just depends. Anybody live in Harris County? You've ever had a speeding ticket? Yeah. Uh-oh. No, oh, noise ordinance tickets. Yeah, the judge is not going to have a lot of sympathy for the third violation, right? They won't let him. Yes, sir.
There was, I can't remember what year it was, but there was some question about adding a tax court. Is that going to be a separate thing, or is it a part of one of the other?
Tax court, that's a good question. So tax court is probably going to be done through administrative law, like these administrative agencies we talked about last week that make the rules. They also have the ability to enforce some of their rules, and they'll do that within their own, I don't want to say court system, but they have it what they call administrative law judges. So like if I got a violation of an OSHA thing, I wouldn't necessarily be in the state court system. I'd be in the administrative thing. Now I can appeal out of that into the court system. The reason we do those is to keep the court system less cluttered, but also to have the administrative law judges be experts in that area. So if I go to Superior Court in Columbus over an OSHA violation, that judge isn't trained in OSHA. I mean, the judge will figure it out, but I'd rather have really technical stuff heard by people who are experts in that area. So tax courts are more likely to be part of either the IRS or the Georgia Department of Revenue. And then again, you always have the right to jump over to the court system if you need to. But that's a good question. I don't really get into that in this class, but there are administrative law judges that handle enforcement of administrative law, which is rules. Great question. All right, any more questions? Good questions this morning. Pull up the federal court system. This is a lot more streamlined than the state court system, right? You have your entry-level trial court that is called a district court. You have your intermediate court of appeals, which is the circuit court of appeals, and then you have the U.S. Supreme Court. There are not as many courts, there are not as many trial courts in the federal court system because the federal court system is much more limited in the types of cases it hears. It's mostly violations of federal law or disputes between citizens of different states. Federal court is not having to worry about if I die, my heirs probating my will. Federal court is not going to be concerned with my divorce or my adoption. Those are all matters of state law. We really only involve a federal court system if there's something that might be unconstitutional about that state law. Maybe I start out in probate court in Georgia, probating my will, and there's a Georgia law that applies somehow, and I think it's unconstitutional, and we work our way up through the Georgia court system. We might can jump over to the federal court system because there's an issue of federal law involved. If it's straight up a state court law issue, usually your last stop is the state Supreme Court. But there are some overlap. And again, you guys aren't lawyers. I'm not expecting you to know the nuances and ins and outs of exactly which court you go to. Just want you to know that there are different ones. The way the federal court system is arranged in the country is that states are grouped into circuits together. Georgia's in the 11th circuit with, I think, Florida and Alabama. So you would start out in a district court that covers the area of the state where you live in or where your dispute occurred. We're in the middle district of Georgia. Georgia has 3 federal court districts, northern, middle, and southern. And if I wanted to appeal from the district court in Georgia, it would go to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. Anybody appealing from the Florida district courts would go to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals on their way to the U.S. Supreme Court. That's my path. If I'm in California or Texas, which is the 5th Circuit, and I don't like what happened to me in district court in Texas, I would appeal to the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals, and that's how I would go to the U.S. Supreme Court. The way that the federal court system is set up lends itself to circuits, these courts of appeal, issuing differing opinions. So let's take the context of the Brown versus Board of Education from last week. That came up through Kansas, which I can't remember which circuit that was, 8th maybe. But maybe we had the same lawsuit in Georgia where minority parents sued because they were denied admission for their children to white schools. In Georgia, that case would have been decided at the district court trial level. It would have been appealed to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, whereas that Kansas case got appealed up through the circuit where Kansas is. So maybe the Kansas Circuit Court of Appeals finds that separate but equal is still constitutional, as it did in that case. But maybe the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals says, you know what, in our case, we think that that is unconstitutional. So the Supreme Court of the United States very often will take cases where they have differing or conflicting opinions from different circuits so that they can sort it all out, right? The Supreme Court might take a case and they say, well, we've got these similar cases in the 11th Circuit, they're finding it this way. In the 5th Circuit, they're finding it this way. In the 8th Circuit, they're finding it this way. We're going to take these cases and we're going to issue one decision, and we're going to say once and for all what the law is on that. We're going to settle these differences that come up. That is the federal court system and the state court system. Any questions on the federal court system? All right, I'm looking through your outline, and I want to go all the way to jurisdiction. Talked earlier that jurisdiction is the power of a court to hear a case. The court has to have jurisdiction over the people, the parties before it, but also the subject matter. So I couldn't, if my children fight over my will, they're going to do that in probate court here in Georgia because the juvenile court would not have subject matter jurisdiction over a will issue. It would have personal jurisdiction over my children and me because I died and live in Muskogee County. They got to have jurisdiction over the people and of the subject matter. Jurisdiction over people has evolved over time in a significant way. Think back to the creation of our country, 1800s, and the state of technology, of transportation, of interstate commerce, right? We talked about this a little bit last week. Wasn't a lot of interstate commerce. Most commerce was local. Folks were traveling by horse and buggy, maybe eventually by train. They certainly weren't traveling by automobile. Society was not very mobile. You pretty much lived where you grew up. You didn't move around from state to state. You didn't take a job. You didn't live in Georgia and take a job in California. That just wasn't how they operated. And so when we think of jurisdiction in its original form, it would be hard to think of a situation where a California court would have jurisdiction over a Georgia resident. So back in the day, when this all got set up, the idea that a court could only have jurisdiction over residents of its state was pretty easy to see and to operate. Of course, I can't sue somebody from California in a Georgia court. It's going to take them 8 weeks to get here by horse. It's inconvenient. They didn't do it. They don't have anything to do with the state of Georgia. Right? If I want to sue them, I need to go where they are. Well, over time, as you can imagine, society has gotten mobile. I mean, we're flying through airports all the time. I'm flying to LA, I might be connecting through Minnesota. While I'm in Minnesota, I might shoot somebody. Right? Would it be fair for Minnesota to have personal jurisdiction over me for shooting somebody in their state? Absolutely. So jurisdiction has morphed from this idea that you're pretty much only subject to being sued where you live to the fact that, yeah, you're always going to be subject to being sued where you live, but you're also subject to being sued where you do business, where you've done something wrong, where there's a connection between your actions and the reason you're being arrested or sued. That's all fair these days. How does a state decide? How does a court decide whether or not it has jurisdiction over a person from another state? That's what we're going to walk through. Every state has a long-arm statute. And long-arm statutes are going to differ from state to state, but they're all generally the same. And they say if a resident of another state commits a bad act or a harmful act in the state of Georgia, whether they're physically present or not, then Georgia courts can have jurisdiction over them. Right? Let's say that I've never been to Alabama, ever. I've never set foot in the state. But every Friday night, I like to sit on the banks of the Chattahoochee River and fire rockets over at Phoenix City. Okay? Under the long-arm statute of Alabama, they would say, is there enough of a connection between my actions of launching projectile missiles into their state and the reason that they're suing me or that they're arresting me? Yeah, right? If my wife wants to go sue me for divorce in Alabama, then the long-arm statute is going to look at my actions and conduct and decide whether or not that has anything to do with them having jurisdiction. We don't live in Alabama. We don't go to Alabama. Our house is not in Alabama. Alabama courts are not really going to have long-arm jurisdiction over my divorce because that has nothing to do with my contacts with Alabama. So it's kind of a sliding scale. The more contacts you have with another state, the more likely you are to be subject to jurisdiction there. Even when you have few contacts with another state, the more that your contacts have to do with the reason you're being sued or arrested, the more likely you are to have jurisdiction there. Let's look at some examples of that for a second. The legal language that all long-arm statutes have basically says that a state court may exercise personal jurisdiction over a non-resident, that is a resident of another state, so long as there exists minimum contacts between the defendant and the forum state. Minimum contacts protects, if you again think back to the formation of the country, this idea protects people from having to litigate in an inconvenient or distant forum. That was my example about I live in California, but it's the 1800s. I'm being sued in Georgia for something that has nothing to do with me or nothing to do with Georgia. It's inconvenient for me to get there. And it also puts limits on states to where they can't just go around entertaining jurisdiction over people from other states without a constitutional reason. The constitutional reason would be the minimum contacts, whether or not it's fair or not for the person to be sued there. So a couple of different examples. Let's look at one where there's no contact whatsoever. A non-resident has no contact whatsoever with Georgia. It's unlikely that they could be sued in Georgia. Example, Jake lives in Alaska. He's never been to Georgia. He's never done business with anybody in Georgia. He has no contacts in Georgia. Very unlikely he could be sued in Georgia. If there are a few contacts, it's going to depend on the nexus between the type of contact it is and what the lawsuit is. So, for example, Jake lives in Alaska. He's never been to Georgia. He doesn't do business with anybody in Georgia. Over Christmas break, he flies through the Atlanta airport on his way to Florida. He really could only be sued in Georgia if the reason was related to the time he spent at the airport in Atlanta. So the fewer the contacts, the more those contacts have to be lined up with the reason you're being sued. Another example where there are a few contacts. Jake lives in Alaska. He's never been to Georgia until Christmas. He vacationed in St. Simon's Island. He could only be sued in Georgia if the suit was related to his time in Georgia, like if he was in an automobile accident while he was here, or if he committed a crime while he was here. Some people, though, have so many contacts with a different state that we would classify those as systematic and continuous. And their contacts are of such volume and scope that they really could be sued for any reason. The example on that would be Jake is an Alaska resident, but he owns auto dealerships around the country. He owns 2 in Georgia. He comes to Georgia 5 or 6 times a year for business. He owns a lake house in North Georgia where he spends each summer. He owns one half of another corporation that operates dry cleaners in 10 Georgia cities. Jake could probably be sued in Georgia related to any of his contacts or activities in Georgia for sure. Anything related to his lake house, his time spent here, his auto dealership, his dry cleaner business, but maybe even some things that aren't related to that because he has such a presence here. It would be up to the trial court in each separate case if the defendant raised his hand and said, "You don't have jurisdiction over me." Then the trial, if that question was before the trial court, they would take evidence, right? Well, how many times have you been to Georgia, Mr. Tebow? What property do you own in Georgia? Where is that? What kind of property is it? How often do you stay at that property? Do you own businesses in Georgia? Those are the types of evidence and fact gathering that the trial court would do. And then the judge at the trial court level would decide whether or not those contacts were enough to support jurisdiction. If I disagree with the trial court's decision, again, I could appeal it, but I would not be appealing any of the facts. How many times I come to Georgia, what I own in Georgia, my business in Georgia. I would only be appealing that the judge made a mistake by saying that those facts are enough to support jurisdiction. Again, that's just an illustration of the difference between issues of fact and issues of law. These are the facts. The judge just applied the law wrongly to them. Pull up for a second your on your content module. I've put a fact pattern in there. This is not on the quiz. But I want you to take a second to read just the fact pattern. You can stop at discussion questions. All right, so let's make everybody from Levi over. You guys are on the side of the Florida company, and everybody from Mr. Gaduru over to this side. You guys are on the side. You guys represent, what's her name? Emma. You guys are Emma's lawyers. Everybody over here is Peach's lawyers. Is that their name? Peach? And we go to Emma sues Peach in a Georgia court for products liability and for the damages that were caused by the laptop's fire. Would this be a criminal case or a civil case? Civil case. Very good. All right, and you guys say time out at the beginning of the case. You do not have jurisdiction over me. We're a Florida company. All right. What are all the reasons that you would tell the court that they don't have jurisdiction over you? Or what facts support that? No employees in Georgia. What else, Levi?
They're based in Florida.
They're based in Florida. Do they have any offices here? Okay. What else?
They don't do any advertising besides Google Ads.
So their advertising is passive, right? It's not like they're sending out MailChimp stuff to Georgia people. Would that make a difference? Probably so. Yeah. Feels more like jurisdiction. All right. They don't do business here. How much, what about their proportion of sales? Only 3%. What else?
They sold 50
Only 50. What else? All right. Emma's lawyers, your turn. I'm the judge and I say, Peach over here says they don't do business here. They have a very small percentage of sales. They don't have employees here. Their advertising is all passive. How do I have jurisdiction over them? What say you?
You could say the damage was done in Georgia.
No. The damage was done in Georgia, right? Who sent the laptop to Georgia? Peach did, right? What else?
It's not written on here, but there is probably some type of implied warranty.
Well, if there is an implied warranty that the computer was fit, the question would then be, do you sue them in Florida or Georgia to enforce that? So question here is, Emma's lawyers are saying we absolutely have jurisdiction over you.
I mean, their name is Peach Computer.
their name is Peach Computers. What else? They said it was only 3% of sales.
You just still did commerce and minimum contact.
Still did commerce in Georgia. What other questions might you want to ask about their sales?
You also follow up with us by phone, which is TCPA.
Oh, they followed up by phone? Yeah, that was them. That's looks more like purposeful contacts in Georgia, right? Yeah.
Probably ask for more business.
Well, they said they only sold 50. Maybe 50 is a big. Depends on. I guess I'm saying it depends on what their total is. We're talking about statistics; those can be manipulated, right? It was only 3% of our sales. Well, maybe that 3% of sales equaled $1 million. Maybe 3% of sales equaled $30. What if Peach sold one computer, sent it to Georgia for $1 million, and that was the only business they did in Georgia? Does that feel more like Emma has jurisdiction or not? $1 million is a pretty big transaction. My argument would be that's not a minimum contact. That's a pretty damn sufficient contact. If Peach sold one computer for $5 and they sold 1 million computers last year, the only one they sold to Georgia was Emma's for $5, that's pretty minuscule, right? This is intentionally written to be a closer call. Back in the day, it would be less likely that Peach would be subject to jurisdiction in Georgia because their advertising was passive. In today's world, it would be more likely that they'd be subject to jurisdiction in Georgia because just putting an ad out there on the internet and saying, I didn't target anybody, is a little bit disingenuous these days, because you know when you put that ad out there that it's going to be seen by who? Anybody on the planet. We don't have any control over it. Would it be reasonable for me to expect that somebody in Indonesia could see my ad? Sure. That's the nature of things these days. Yes.
Now, you said that back in the day it would be likely that it wouldn't have been the right jurisdiction, but like technically if it was back in the day, let's say pre-internet time, so you're talking about a different product, wouldn't they have had to send out advertisements into Georgia for people to find out?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Damien. The law evolved over time. So we started out back in the day, in the beginning, with the idea that most of people from other states wouldn't be subject to jurisdiction in other states. And then we had the advent of advertising. And think about how most interstate advertising would have been done through catalogs or newspapers. And so courts at first found that just putting an ad in a magazine might not be purposeful enough. It's passive, it's not targeted at anybody. But over time, that evolved to where now we know when we put an ad in a magazine or a newspaper, it's going to be seen by any number of people. They sell newspapers in airports. Millions of people pass through airports every day. I can't claim that not putting an ad in the Atlanta Journal is not, it's reasonable for me to assume that that ad's going to be seen by people from every other state and other countries every day. That's kind of how that evolved. The idea of putting things into the stream of commerce. We didn't used to ship things to other states, right? Now, to you guys' point, I think, on the computer, they put it in the mail and they sent it into Georgia. Kind of like me sitting on the banks of the Hooch and firing rockets into Phoenix City. Not exactly the same, but they sent a defective product into Georgia where it exploded. Yes, sir.
Could that also make it stronger for you to put it into U.S. District Court for Georgia versus a state court?
Yes, when you have disputes between citizens of different states, you could choose to go into the federal court system, but Peach could also argue that you needed to go in the federal court system in Florida. You need to start there. So it's a little bit of the same analysis, but yeah, you would have a choice. All right, does that make sense to folks? All right, the next step of analysis on minimum contacts is for corporations. We know where I live, we know where I travel, we know where I do business, we know where I make phone calls, we know where my internet activity is. I'm a person. What about for a business? How do we decide where a business lives or does business? So corporations are subject to this minimum contacts long-arm statute also. They are subject to being protected from being sued in jurisdictions where they don't have minimum contacts. But corporations have a little bit wider exposure to that than people do. Corporations can be sued where they're in the state where they're incorporated. They can be sued in their principal place of business, like where their headquarters is. And they can be sued in any state where they're doing business, even if it's not related to the suit. So let's say that I have my law practice is an LLC. It's incorporated in Georgia. If somebody from California wants to sue me for something that happened in California, but they want to do it here because this is where my business is incorporated, that's fine. You can always get sued in the state where you live. There's really no defense to that. What we're talking about is when you get sued somewhere where you don't live or where you don't have contacts. Any questions on that? So you can see that in that way, it's pretty hard for a business who does business across state lines, either physically or on the web. It's a lot harder for a business to fight jurisdiction than it is a person. I think almost every time in the case that we talked about earlier, that the Georgia court would find jurisdiction over Peach, even if it was a very small percentage of sales, even if it wasn't a very big sale, because they sent it into Georgia. The case that I've assigned you for this week is a long arm statute case. It involves a car dealership in Florida and a purchaser in Georgia. So it's very, very similar to the one we just did. And in that case, as you read through it, the court will take you on a history lesson of this is how we used to look at long arm statute cases. This is how the law evolved as society and commerce evolved. And this is how we look at it now. Then they're going to take the facts of that case, a car sold from Florida into Georgia, and decide whether or not the Georgia person could sue the Florida corporation here for that car being defective. Very, very similar analysis to the one we just did. So we'll do on Thursday, we'll do like we did last week with Brown. I will call on you and ask you to help tell me the facts of the case, what the precedents were, what the court decided, so on and so forth. It is 10:32 and we end at what time? Okay, we got a couple more minutes. Let me see what I want to do for the rest of the time. Oh, I'll say a couple more points from your outline. I just want to finish it off. The idea of jurisdiction, you saw the illustration in the Georgia court system handout about how there's overlap. Sometimes a court will have exclusive jurisdiction. That means it can only be brought in one place. Some courts have concurrent jurisdiction, meaning it can be brought in both. Not really testing you on those, but I just wanted to point that out. It is in your outline, and those are the terms that we would place on the idea that all courts have certain subject matter that they can hear, and that there is overlap between that. Venue is in your outlines on the last page, venue and standing. Venue refers to the physical, geographical location that you could be sued in. So like if my earlier example where I rear-ended Mr. Gaduru, he is a resident. You from Columbus? Or let's say you're from Atlanta. Say he's a resident of Atlanta. He just comes to school here. Let me flip that around. Let's say I'm from Atlanta. He's from Columbus. I run into him here. He wants to sue me for personal injury. The court that has jurisdiction over that is a superior court or a state court. Okay? Venue means which county does he go to? We know he goes to superior court or a state court, but we don't know which county. Venue is which county. So you could sue me in Muskogee County because that's where the accident happened, or you could sue me in Fulton County because that's where I live. Venue would be proper in either of those places. If you sued me in Chatham County, which is Savannah, then venue would be improper there. And what I would do when we got there is I would raise my hand and say, we're in the right court, but we're in the wrong location. This needs to either be moved to Muskogee County where it happened or Fulton County where I live. And Savannah court would send it there. That's venue. Very similar to the idea of jurisdiction, but there is a difference in that. Standing is the idea that a person who brings a lawsuit has to have a personal interest in the lawsuit in order to do so. Mr. Gaduru could sue me for the auto accident because he's the one that was injured. Levi cannot sue me for rear-ending Gaduru. He doesn't have standing to sue me because he has no interest in the case. Make sense? I can't challenge a California law that applies to California residents, let's say that defines which California residents can vote in which precinct. That I can't challenge that law as being unconstitutional because I don't have standing to sue there. I'm not an interested party. All right, so we're going to do a couple more two truths and a lie, and I'll let y'all go early. For Thursday, I want you to read the Arrow versus Greaves case. And then I'm going to have some current events to kind of talk about like we did last week. And then if we have any time left over, we may do a couple more two truths and a lie. So I'm going to stop my video for the people watching. But in the time we've got left, who wants to go that has not gone?